Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
I'm very blessed and happy to be here to give you a semi-short introduction or story of my journey into Orthodoxy, with the preface being, of course, that I'm still journeying into my Orthodoxy. The idea that there's a point where you can say to yourself, I have become Orthodox, will happen when you stand before the Lord and he says, Lord willing, well done, my good and faithful servant. Then and only then can anyone say, I have become Orthodox, with the understanding even more so that you have eternity to continue to grow in your faith. There's never a time for a Christian when you come to a place and you say, I have gained all understanding and all knowledge. That doesn't happen. And it's a beautiful journey. And so my journey began, like all of us, in that I was born of a woman in the year of our Lord 1974 in Vancouver. My parents at that time lived in West Vancouver, overlooking English Bay. So my early years were spent in a apartment, a condo tower, of which I have no memory, of course, because I was a child. My mother comes from a very long Mennonite background, Mennonite aristocracy, as I like to claim it. They were quite wealthy. My father's side is a mix of Welsh, Russian, and Cherokee, some Choctaw, some from Oklahoma, thrown in there for good measure. So I was the first of my parents' two children. I have one younger sister, born in the year 1977. She, however, was born in Calgary because my father worked in Manulife Insurance. And so we traveled a lot. We went from Vancouver to Calgary to Mississauga, Ontario, to Milton, Ontario, and then finally settled in a little town outside of a town called Stony Plain, Alberta, when I was, I think that would have been when I was 5. So we moved a lot during my first years, like a lot. And then finally settled out in the country. I like to say I knew something was special, something going on was special when we were driving on paved roads, because that we were getting near the city. Wow. So I spent, my early elementary years there, playing hockey and living on a farm and riding horses and all that manner of stuff, and essentially living outside for the most part. That is where I was introduced to my cat, named Mork. I was 5. My cat lived with me until I was 28.
Same cat.
Same cat. He lived a very, very, very long life.
How long he lived?
He lost his tail because he was sleeping in the old Ford in the winter, and my dad went to get started up and lost his tail. He was my companion through what was a very difficult childhood. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details because I really don't remember a lot of it. But it wasn't easy, and I was a very challenging child, to be certain. There was a lot of running away, and a lot of difficulty there. Eventually, we packed up our bags again and moved all the way to live with my grandparents in downtown Richmond. So you have to remember, I was used to going to my friends riding bareback on my horse and, snowmobiling around and having nobody, like just wide open spaces, to all of a sudden being downtown. Big city. It was very, very difficult. It's not a lot of fun. It did not work well for me. And so we lived with them for a while, and I'm very honest. You'll find out that I'm a very honest person. It was not a lot of fun living with my grandparents. They were devout Mennonites. They were very stoic. The idea of struggling outwardly and being open and honest was not something that was allowed. I did, however, connect very deeply with my mom's youngest brother, my Uncle Mark, because he was closer in my age, and he was a bit of a rebel as well. Plus, he drove really nice cars. He had like a lowrider. This was in the 80s, kids. He had like a lowrider. He had a Porsche. Like, he was really cool. He was awesome. I loved him. I love that guy. So that was very hard. Then we moved from there, my parents bought a home in Fort Langley. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Fort Langley on the coast. But Fort Langley now is like this really cute bourgeois town where they sell fancy candles and, you know, all this sort of stuff. When I was there, it was not like that. It was kind of like Barrier, to be honest. Maybe a little bit, but it was pretty rough. It was rough. And we had when I was in grade 10 in my junior high, we had a rumble, like an Outsiders rumble. Have you guys read The Outsiders?
Yes.
So like chains and pipes in the graveyard in Fort Langley with Mountain Senior Secondary.
Wow.
So I went to junior high there, and junior high and high school was very difficult for me. Not in the sense that it was hard it was just I didn't see the point, and I didn't fit in, and it wasn't great, and it was hard, and there was a long period of bullying that started in grade. This obviously when you move from the prairies, the middle of nowhere, and it was very different. So I experienced bullying, but then things got better, and high school was okay. I barely passed, and it wasn't because I couldn't do the work. It's because I didn't care. I actually spent more time in my Western Civilizations class in grade 12. My teacher came to me at the end of the year and said, "So, how many year-end projects did you work on?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Because I can see your handiwork in a majority of the assignments that got handed to me." So what I would do is I'd sit in the library, and people would come to me, "Oh, this is why I had to research this." I'm like, "Okay, you need to look at this and this and this, whatever this." But I didn't do my own work because I saw the world in a very different way, and I was a member of a Mennonite church, but I was baptized when I was 16. But I will be honest with you, I went to church at those ages from about 15 to 18 for one single purpose: to find a girl, to hook up. That was the only reason I went. So I was baptized, but for me it was it was nothing. It was meaningless and emptiness. Didn't mean anything. Which is very different than my wife's experience in her baptism in the Mennonite community. When I was 16, I got a job at Earl's, and I started as a dishwasher, and that started my career in the restaurant world. If you know anything about the restaurant world, it's not the greatest place to be. So I found myself enraptured in a world of drugs and alcohol and partying. And for me, it was very much a survival mechanism, because in the 80s and 90s, there was very little, especially in the 80s, there was very little work done on diagnosing children with mental health issues. Right? It was either you had ADHD and they gave you Ritalin, or you didn't know. And my parents didn't really trust that system. So when I got sort of out of the confines of the home, my mental health deteriorated a lot, and I used a lot of substances in order to survive. And I mean, I want to regale you the stories of them because I didn't want to give the glory to that, but it was everything under the sun. I managed to keep clear of needles, glory to God, but other than that, you name it. And in that period from about 17 to 25, at about 20, I was diagnosed with rapid cycling bipolar disorder with audio and visual hallucinations. So I tried very strong, I made a very good attempt to kill myself in 1997. And by the miracle of the Lord, I survived. What happened was, obviously I was on medication, significant antipsychotic medication, all that jazz. I came home in my little room, and I took all of my medication, months of medication, a bottle of Jack Daniels, an 8-ball of cocaine, and 14 hits of LSD. And I unplugged all the phones in the house so no one could call. My aunt, who lived in Edmonton, got a phone call from our house. No one on the other line. No one, I just got a phone call. You know, like, she didn't know. Hung up, and the first thing she did was call the ambulance.
Wow.
The ambulance showed up and like banged on the door. My parents woke up. I woke me. So I was a bit conscious, and it's just crazy. And that they took me to the emergency room. They were astonished that I was alive. I think my heartbeat was like in the 200s. So they gave me, they drink the charcoal. They wanted to flush my stomach. Didn't work. Nothing worked. And I remember after it sort of got me settled, I wasn't in immediate risk of death. I had a pastor come in and tell me that I was there because I had unresolved sin issues, because I was a sinner. And that was the final stake in my, I'm going to ever have anything to do with God again. I was done. They moved me from ICU to psych ward. And I was there over Christmas, and I watched the Super Bowl there. So like a long stay. It's a long stay. Because I was unwell, very unwell. And during that period, I had a vision. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination. It was a vision of Christ. I was in my room, and the Lord appeared to me, and the Lord said, there's still time to choose. There are two paths you can go by, but there's still time to choose the road you're on. Which is a direct quote of Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. Which I lived and breathed Zeppelin from like 10 years old. So I would like hide under my covers, and like I would record songs off the radio when my parents were home because I wasn't allowed to listen to that stuff. And then I would listen under my covers to Zeppelin. Like it was my safe place. And so at that moment, I said, okay, I'll choose to follow. Now, I didn't get out of the psych ward and go back to church and become this beautiful Christian. That did not happen. It was a long, long road. When I met so I was struggling with this, and I had done a bunch of different things, and I ended up in southeastern Alberta working at a Christian conference center and camp. I lived in Medicine Hat for a while, and I was sort of like, I was very in between. It was like I had no territory under my feet. I wasn't grounded. I was sort of just floating around. I didn't know who I was. I was unmedicated at times. Other times I was medicated. My mother had found this pill called EM Power. It's actually specifically designed to treat, in case you're wondering, pigs actually have a very similar disorder to bipolar. And this is a treatment that was founded in like Alberta. And the guy gave his pigs responded, and his neighbor's wife was just having bipolar and it was really bad, and so they tried it and she got better. And so my mom found this and gave it to me, and I was taking it, and it certainly balanced like the manic and the depressive, right? Like the manic wasn't quite as high and the depression wasn't quite as low. So I was able to function, right? I learned how to function really well. But not survive. It was not life in any way, shape, or form. And then I eventually followed the chef who I finished my seal with to Cranbrook. And little did I know, right, because this is like a Christian camp, right? So foolish me assuming that people who go to Christian camps are Christians. I found out otherwise. And I had, I'll be honest, there was a lot of naivety in there. My mental illness made me really sort of naive and trustworthy. And I put myself in situations where I got very hurt. So I moved to Cranbrook, and I was working, he had agreed to take over the head chef of this hotel in Cranbrook, and I was his sous chef. And he was a cheat and underhanded and terrible. Ended up getting fired by the owner, and it was a big mess. And so, but I still, like, he's my friend, he's my chef, right? Like, so we then moved from Cranbrook to Kimberley, which is just up the road. And we lived there in a house, and he worked at one place and I worked at one place, and I started to spiral out of control. And he eventually met someone and got married, told me I could live in their house with them, because they were leaving in Seattle. And then at the day or two before we were to move, he told me no. So all of a sudden I was out of a house. But I had a car, right? I had a car. Now, I was also not sober most of the time. So I ended up I hit a parked car with my car on my way to cash a check to get more stuff to drink. And so it's funny. I mean, I hit this parked car, pulled in, was I guess coherent enough to go to the bar and start pounding back drinks. So when the cops came, I'm like, so I only got a 24-hour, but you know, survival, right? But I didn't have any money to fix my car. So, and I didn't have anywhere to live. So I made an arrangement with this guy at the tow yard where they towed my car that I could come after hours and sleep in my car, which is what I was doing until I could find a place to live. So I did that for a while, and I hitchhiked to Kimberley to work. And one night I met this guy, and he had like a room in his area, in his basement suite, and it was not a good environment. And I was like, for me, food was like, I had a bag of rice and I had a ham bone. And I would go to the Chinese food restaurant and order a bowl of rice, and I would steal all the condiments, all the soy sauce, everything. I'd ask for all the sauce. I'd just take everything because that's what I would eat. And it was a rough life. And eventually I found myself, there's a big bridge between Cranbrook and Kimberley that you go over. And one night I found myself at that bridge. And it's a long walk between Cranbrook and Kimberley. This is in the middle of the night. And I was standing on that bridge, and I was ready to go. And all of a sudden, a cop showed up. Woo! I didn't know, like, it's like probably like 3 o'clock in the morning. What are you doing? I'm like, I'm jumping. Like, no, you're not. So I got apprehended under the Mental Health Act, and then I got to spend time. You know what was really one of the nicest psych wards I'd ever been in. Big windows, you can see the mountains. It's beautiful. And then I came back, so they let me out. I came back. Obviously, I had nothing, right? I was living with my parents again, but I was still struggling. I was still doing a lot of substance just to survive, right? Just to get by, just to make it another day. And eventually, in the year 2000, and this is what really started my real move back towards God, is that my uncle Mark, who I was very, very close with, who took me in many times, who also suffered from major depressive disorder, took his own life. And he wrote me a note, especially for me. And I remember when the police came to the door, it was a Sunday morning in March, and they came to the door. Oh, and by the way, I just broken up with my girlfriend, like a couple months before, like at Christmas time, she broke up with me because I was moving towards Christ, and she didn't like that. And I was very much in love with her, so I was a mess, right? And then the police came, and it was. He wrote a very special note to me. He gave me he took his watch off before he took his watch off and put it in with the note. I still have that watch. I couldn't keep the note. It was too hard. But I remember walking and seeing his casket, the open casket, and knowing that should have been me. And it was, I can't tell you how profound of a breakdown I had. I realized, like, I don't know if I can put it into words. So this is the shape I was in, right? An utter mess. Like, I had nothing. And I decided to go on a missions trip with the church that my parents go to. That was actually when we moved to Walnut Grove in my teenagers, like right across the street. So I'm like, okay, maybe I just need to get away and do something. Oh, I should go back. In between this time, there was periods where I would like grasp hold of life, like do something good, and I actually went to this is the story of the getting kicked out of Bible colleges. My first Bible college kick out was right after high school. My parents sent me to Briarcrest Bible College in the prairies. Yeah, that didn't work out so well. It was good. So I got asked to leave. They wouldn't even let me stay. So anyways, and then my second encounter with Bible college was at a Cape and Ray in Texas, of all places. And I went there after after my suicide attempt. So I was out and I went there, and I was drinking from the moment my parents dropped me off at the airport. I was drinking on the plane. I was like, when I got there, I was 3 sheets to the wind, as they say. The most difficult part of that experience is as a smoker, I hated American cigarettes. I hated them, but I had nothing. Like, what am I going to do, right? And we weren't allowed to smoke, but we found ways to do that. Interestingly enough, I still have friends from there that I talk to regularly. So God's already like interjecting himself or revealing himself. Isaiah thought he wasn't there. He's already starting to reveal himself to me. Right? I just had a very hard time hearing it. And after my uncle died, I think I was in a place where I had nothing left. And so I went on this mission trip. And the reason I went on this mission trip is not because I wanted to share the gospel. We were going to Ireland. And my question to the leader was, so I go to an Irish Catholic and I say, do you believe in Jesus? And they say, yes. And then I say, do you believe you died on the cross and rose from the dead for your sins? And they say, yes. What do I do? What am I converting them to? I don't understand. Anyways, I went because it was Ireland. And is there someone there?
I don't know.
No.
It's okay.
I went to Ireland because it was Ireland and because I wanted to drink Guinness and whiskey, which I did because I was an adult. So we got to go to the Jameson's distillery, and I'll tell you, in that period, I was either God or Satan. It was called Drive. So we did like these enactments of things, and I was either the bad guy or the good guy. And I had come back, and I was just like, I have no clue what I'm going to do. And there was a program for people struggling with mental health that put you in employers. So I ended up with a family-run business selling high-end horse fencing and barn supplies throughout the west coast of North America. So I'm doing that on Christmas Eve of 2001. I went to my friend's house, Mike, because we were going to go to Christmas Eve service at the Holy Rosary Cathedral in Vancouver, Roman Catholic Church. At that family gathering was his cousin. Her name was Krista. And so we sort of talked a little bit. I remember got in the car, and Mike's was a little bit dull at that time, so he sat right between us, which was kind of frustrating. But that was the first day that I met my wife. We came back. I didn't see her again until New Year's Eve at a New Year's Eve party. And she will attest to this, she kissed me first. The interesting thing is I sat her down beforehand and I said, look, you need to know everything. Here's everything. And I'm like, if you still want to hang, if you're still okay with that, it's fine. She had said in her life, I'm never gonna even get close to a smoker. And I was a 2-pack a day player. It's like all I could afford. I went from like Benson and Hedges Black, all the fancy ones,
So good.
yeah, to like players like anyways. So she kissed me first, and from that time on, like I knew within a day. She did too, and we were inseparable. And so our first official date, I think, was like the 3rd. We went to Monsters Incorporated, and then we went out for Italian. And then we were inseparable. I don't think we missed a day together. I worked at Abbotsford, lived at my parents' house, but I would come and stay at her parents' house. Because she was 21 at the time. She had just gotten back from Europe. And yeah, so we were married December 28th, 2002. So within the year. It was a year and 4 days or something like that anyways. And I was still working selling horse fencing and barn supplies. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a small family business. Okay? But when you bring someone in from outside, right, and that outside person starts outselling the owner's son, who's the manager, they don't like that. And because they were also required to pay me, the government paid half my salary for a certain period, and they paid the other half. And then there was a point where they were going to have to pay me. They agreed on the commission, but at the point the government ended, they were going to have to pay me my full salary plus a larger commission. And I was selling way more, and it didn't work well, so they fired me. Right after the period where the government shared, they let me go. And I was like, I was devastated, because I was really good at that job, right? Like I enjoyed it. I got to travel, go to horse shows and stuff like that. It was good money at the time. And so here I am. I have no job. I'm going to marry this woman. I have no money. So I had to go and ask my grandfather. My uncle had laid aside money for me in his will. But I had my grandpa was the executor, so I asked him, can I have money for this wedding ring? And he gratefully obliged. I was not going to take no for an answer, by the way. So he obliged, and I remember buying the ring, and then we had talked about it, and she had actually designed it. It's her design, and we went to a ring maker, and they had made me, So I remember paying for it, and then I got in my car, in my Jetta, and I drove. And I drove all the way to Creston. Because I didn't know how to do this. I was like, I was running away, because that's what I did before. I stopped, turned back, and I drove all the way back in time to pick her up from work. And then I had made my decision, and then a couple weeks after that, I asked her to marry me, right? No job, whatever. She's like, no, you're going to go to Bible school. I'm like, okay, sure. So got a student loan, got a grant, went to Bible college for 4 years, got a BA in youth work because I wanted to work with people like me who had struggled on the streets and who had struggled through mental health. And there was a lot of roadblocks that were put in place for some reason for me doing that. I had an internship set up, and then all of a sudden it failed. And I ended up going into the pastoral ministry, which I never expected myself to be at. So I was a pastor of an evangelical church called the Cross Current. There were 2 other pastors I worked with. It started very small, like maybe 25 people. And in the 5 years that I was there, we were averaging about 200 people. We probably had about 300 people who would come. So it was exponential growth. During my time in Bible college, I was given an assignment in my church history class. Now, if you've ever been to an evangelical Bible college, church history class goes like this. The Apostles, Pentecost, Martin Luther. And that's how it goes. There's a little bit in between, but that's the little bit. I'll give credit to my prof. He did mention some Byzantine stuff, but it was and Roman, but it was not much, right? So we were given an assignment to write a biography of someone from church history, and I didn't want to do anybody from Protestant time. So I was walking in the library stacks at Columbia Bible College, and I stumbled, or St. Symeon grabbed me by the throat and thrust me, and I looked, and there's a book on St. Symeon, the New Theologian. I was like, what? Like, what is this? And then I find out that not only is he a theologian, but he's a poet. I love poetry. In the sense that I love reading it, and for me, writing it is a very cathartic experience, and none of you will ever see those poems, by the way. So don't ask, please. so I was very intrigued, and he wrote a series, a whole book called Poems on Divine Eros, and I wept when I read it. So people ask, what was your introduction to Orthodoxy? My introduction to Orthodoxy was very personal and intimate. And I was like, what is this? And I knew enough about church history. I wasn't completely uneducated. And also, I should tell you that time when I started Bible college, I was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of Canada. I was on. Let me finish. I was, at that time, very much a hardcore Marxist. I was. I'll admit it. Obviously, it was a delusion. I now know.
How can you be a Marxist and go to a Bible college?
Don't ask me. The Lord works weird things. This is my story. This is why it doesn't fit. It doesn't work. So, I don't know. I was there and the Lord worked, and so I stumbled upon St. Symeon, and really we began a relationship. And I started to learn about the Eastern Church and the liturgical practices, and it started to become part of my spiritual life. And at that time, we had my daughter Tukoa in 2005, and then I graduated in 2006, and then in 2007 we had my son Axton, and I was working as a roofer at the time. So I've had my share. I've been a landscaper, a janitor, a salesman, a chef, a roofer, all sorts of different things. And then my tattooist, his brother was going to this church that had just started in the basement of this guy's house. And he's like, they're looking for another pastor. He'd be great. You should go talk to him. So we met at a Starbucks, and that's where it started. And from the very beginning, I was very adamant that we needed to practice communion every Sunday. Because in my heart, I knew it was the only way to unify people in a church, that we were only going to find unity through the experience of Christ. And there were some people who were like, we can't, why do we want it? Then it won't be special. I'm like, well, or it will be habit and a routine. And I was like, if the remembrance and participation in the death and resurrection of Christ becomes boring and routine, it's not the remembrance that's the problem. So we did that, and I will tell you, to this day, that church still continues to do that, and it still continues to make them a family. It was remarkable. All the stuff that I had learned in Bible college about how to do programming and stuff like that, it was the reception of the communion that built that family. But I was slowly moving away. I was reading more, practicing more, fasting more, and talking with my wife, and I decided in that period, I think it was 2008-9, to go and do my master's degree in philosophy at Trinity Western University. I went there, and clearly we were speaking different languages. I'll just say that. I am actually friends with the philosophy department head at Trinity to this day, but we spoke very different languages. And I had gone in there because I wanted to validate myself. I had gone in there because I wanted to let everybody know how smart I was. And the Lord laid me down and smacked me down. I went through a period where I couldn't even read. I would get dizzy and nauseous. It was really hard. You ask Krista about it. I would lie on the floor, and I couldn't write. I couldn't do anything. And so after that, I really started to dive into making my life Orthodox. And, Krista started to come along. And we were having discussions about, what we saw in the evangelical church and what was going on and what we were learning. And then some of my friends from Bible college started going to the Orthodox Church in Langley, St. Herman's. And so I went to one of their house blessings, my now Father Ryan in Meadow Lake. We graduated, same graduating class, both become Orthodox priests now. I went to his house blessing. And there I met Father Lawrence. And we began catechesis classes. But I couldn't come on Sunday because I was at work in the church. So we did that for almost 6 to 8 months. We would meet regularly and meet with Krista. So the first time all of us stepped foot into an Orthodox church for liturgy, we became catechumens. We knew some people at St. Herman's, but we didn't know that many. And then that was in September of 2011. So I resigned my position as a full-time pastor. And that meant I had no job. So I went on EI, and then I didn't know what I was going to do. And I got a job as a on-call crisis youth care counselor. So what I would do is kids who got kicked out of their group home or the foster home and needed a place to stay, I'd go and stay with them in a hotel and stuff like this. And that got by. And then in March of 2012, a couple months prior to that, I had had a meniscus repair in my knee done. I got surgery to repair it. And it wasn't healing properly, so I got a cortisone shot. 2 weeks later, I was in the hospital with a septic infection.
Oh my gosh.
And very nearly lost my leg.
Wow.
2 surgical irizations, a PIC implant like that I had to carry around with me for 6 weeks. It was really hard. And from that trauma, I also developed what could be called complex regional pain syndrome, which is a neurological pain condition. So from 2012 to about 2017, I was essentially immobile. I went from my bed to a chair to being driven to a coffee shop where I sat all day and just read and journaled. Because I realized my body's not working. If I don't take care of my spirit and my mind, I'm going to kill myself. The divorce rate for complex regional pain couples is 95%. Because I couldn't handle being touched sometimes. So I was without work. I had no job, living on disability. We had to move into my in-laws' basement, which was not a basement suite. We washed dishes in a Rubbermaid. We didn't have a stove. We used a little tabletop convection oven, right? So that's where we lived, and I didn't work from 2011, September 2011 until November of 2019. I had no job. Survived on generosity of people, and my generosity of my in-laws, and a pittance from the government for disability. My wife started a soap making company that also helped us, so she was doing that in the basement. We were homeschooling our kids, so it was crazy. It was a very difficult time. And we were Orthodox, and we were learning Orthodox, right? So I was feeling the call to, I had always felt the call to the priesthood. When I became Orthodox and I walked in the church, my body felt good. When I was blessed to go serve in the altar, my body felt better. To this day, it is the only place I can go where I feel good. Nowhere else. And I knew that I was going to be a priest. But I had to go this process of refining where my ideas of what it meant to be a priest had to be dismantled. And so I settled into being patient and waiting and being quiet, sitting at the back, because I couldn't move very much. And then sitting quietly in the altar, being invisible in the altar. In 2018, in March, I was ordained to the diaconate, and then COVID hit. And so I had to wait. But in 2015, the only place to go to become a priest, you have to go get your MDiv. There are 2 places you can go at that time. St. Vlad's in New York or St. Tikhon's in Pennsylvania. There is no way that my family of 6 could afford to leave and go to those places. There's no way. It's not possible. I'm like, Lord, I don't know what we're going to do. I have no idea. I can't work. What am I going to do? This is my desire. I have my spiritual father, and he's, we're working towards this. And then I get a message or a comment on my Instagram page. Oh, have you ever heard of the Orthodox School of Theology? I'm like, what? No. So I look it up, and here it is. This at the University of Toronto, this very prestigious university in Trinity College, which is like even more prestigious within the colleges of the University of Toronto. And I'm like, what the heck is this? So I apply, and I find out that those people who are blessed to go towards professional ministry or ordination, there was a huge endowment found, provided, thanks be to God, by dead Anglicans. So I got accepted, and I didn't pay a dime,
Wow.
except for my books, but everything else was covered. So I managed to do an MDiv, from like a seat, and I could do it online. So I did it in this corner of my local Starbucks. I'd have huge piles of books, right? But it was beautiful, it was wonderful, it kept me alive. And then I had to go to Toronto for the last 6 months. So I had to leave my family behind. At that time, my eldest daughter was starting to really struggle. Really difficult challenges emotionally and all sorts of stuff, mental health, what we thought was mental health issues. It was very difficult. And so I actually came back 4 times during that 6-month stay. I finally got my MDiv. I wasn't actually there because I finished in 2019, but the convocation, I finished late, so I had to wait till 2020 to do the convocation, and I couldn't afford to fly there, so I bought myself a nice hat instead. But I got it. I got a master's degree in divinity, which I think I've said this before, it's the most ridiculous thing ever. Because who could be a master in divinity? My experience there was profound, wonderful. I was taught and I learned how to be a priest in the 21st century. And my life experience is also part of all that process. And so I stand here before you, a bit of a cripple, a bit lame, a bit forgetful, but with as much integrity as I can bring, and with all my love and all my heart. And it is just a joy and a blessing to be here and have a building. And it really, this is my second home. And I know and have confidence the Lord will bring us through to a wonderful time. I know that because I've experienced it. I know what it's like to be at the very, very bottom, past rock bottom, where death is the best thing in the world. And when I was there, Christ met me and wasn't afraid. And he never turned his back on me, even though I walked away so many times. Tried to do things on my own so many times. Tried to wrestle my life into the shape that I wanted so many times. It didn't work. So here I am. I'm an MDiv. I'm a full-time social worker with the Ministry of Children and Families. But I'm a priest. And so when I get presented opportunities, people say, oh, do you want to, we want to do this? And I'm like, they're like, well, what do you want to do with your life? The only thing in my life I want to do is to be a full-time priest. That's it. I work at the Ministry of Children and Families because it has extended benefits and it has a good pension.
Yeah.
And I need money from my family to provide for them. But this is not my vocation. This is my life. And Lord willing, one day we'll be here doing all the services. Mm-hmm. And I mean all of them. Even the long ones.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So that is my and here I am. I was ordained to the priesthood in March of 2022. And yeah, here I am at your service. So
Thank you, Father.
yeah, there you go. If there's any questions? No, I don't know how this all happened. It's the Lord's work. So God bless you all, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Why didn't you end up with the Jesuits and the liberation theology crowds as a Marxist? that would make sense.
It would make sense. I don't know. You'll have to ask the Lord
Okay.
upstairs. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.